Do you know the difference between a kimono and a yukata? They're often confused, but quite different. Come along, I'll show you how you can tell the difference between these two beautiful Japanese garments. This is a Japanese kimono, and this is a Japanese yukata. Both of them structurally look very similar, and they are. They're both made from a tan mono, which is a long strip of fabric that make Japanese garments throughout Japan. And they're sewn together in the same way with two sleeves, two body pieces, front overlaps, and two collars. The best way to differentiate between a kimono and a yukata is the textile. Yukata are made from cotton. This is a Japanese yukata that I made, and it is from Japanese cotton that is cut from a tan mono. Kimono means thing to wear, and it covers not only the single garment but an entire gamut of different garments that are worn for different occasions and made out of different fabrics throughout Japan, and there are a lot of layers to it. So I'll cover that next. Yukata means bathing robe, and that is traditionally what they were used for. You would wear your yukata to and from and around the public bath in Japan. They're also used in onsen towns, and if you've been to Japan and stayed in a ryokan in an onsen town, you were probably presented with a cotton yukata and a haori, the jacket you wear above it, on your bed or maybe on arrival, as well as a pair of geta, so the open sandals that are worn in Japan. This is what's worn in onsen towns. So the yukata is fantastic for bathing because they're made of cotton, they're light, they're absorbent, and they're easily washed and taken care of. Yukata have also become very popular to be worn in high summer. With really high heat, it is a very comfortable garment to wear, and for women especially, it's a comfortable ensemble because the accessories and undergarments you wear with the yukata are lighter and more breathable. So the obi a woman wears with a yukata is called a hanhaba obi. That means half width. Obi are folded in half and then wrapped around the body. A hanhaba obi doesn't need to be folded in half first, so there are less layers going around the body. Thus, it makes it a lighter obi to be worn in an ensemble, and it feels lighter as well. Because they're woven in a different way, more air can get through the obi. The obi can be quite constrictive and quite hot when you wear the wrong obi in the wrong climates. Yukata are also very popular with people who have just finished universities or young couples who are courting. They put on a yukata or they rent a yukata in temple towns, especially the ancient capital Kyoto. And there is a tradition of walking around with your friends or your new loved one wearing a beautiful, colourful yukata and getting your photos taken in front of the beautiful temples of Japan and especially of Kyoto. So, kimono. This is a traditional Japanese kimono. I've left it open so we can talk about its anatomy, but first I'll talk about its fabrication. Kimono, most often than not, are made of silk. That's how we know kimono. They're made of usually something called a chirimen silk, which is like a crepe. So it's not really shiny and like made of satin, which a lot of people, especially in Europe and America, might think of when they consider a kimono. It's actually made of something a lot more matte and a lot more subdued than what we consider when we think of a kimono. Kimono can be made out of silk, linen, rami, hemp, wool. They can be made out of all different fabrics. They can also be made out of polyester, but most often than not, they're made of silk, and often beautiful silk as well. So you wouldn't make a yukata, a bathing or high summer robe, a casual robe, out of this silk. Let's talk about the anatomy. First thing I'm going to talk about is lining. This kimono is lined. Yukata are never lined. Yukata are one layer garments, just like this one here. There's no lining in here, that's just one layer of fabric. You can get kimono that are unlined, they're called hitoe, which just means layer. So you would have a hitoe which is unlined, and then you differentiate it by its fabrication. So if you have a silk garment that looks like a kimono and it is unlined, it is still a kimono. It's called a hitoe. And that is the difference between if it was unlined and made of cotton, you would know it was a yukata. Lined kimonos are called awase, and that covers all kimonos that are lined. The collar is a great way to see the difference between the two. I talked about unlined kimono just before and hitoe, and sometimes the collars are shut on hitoe. On a traditional Japanese kimono, they are often open. So you can see here, this is the collar, and when you wear it, I've left this open so we can have a look at all this. See, there's little poppers and buttons up here. That's a modern addition. But what would happen is when dressing in your kimono, you fold the collar along here as you're putting it on, like that, and then you fold it across. And of course, there's always another level to Japanese dressing. So as you fold it, you make it a little bit wider as it crosses over at the neck and comes across, and that's adding style. So that's sort of tilting your hat, but in the collar. So it's just another way to add a little bit more style to show that you know what you're doing with a kimono. And of course, if this collar was closed, was sewn shut like that at construction, you couldn't then adjust this part here and just open it up a little bit to get that sort of that diagonal look as it comes down. On a yukata, yukatas have closed collars. So my collars are completely sewn together on this to the inside as well. So they don't open up, they're closed shut. We talked about unlined kimono before, hitoe. Sometimes you will find hitoe with a closed collar, and the way then you determine whether it's a kimono or a yukata is by looking at the fabrication. And if it's cotton and has a closed collar, so the collar has been sewn shut like that, it's probably a yukata. Often hitoe are made with an open collar, but the collar is lined, or just along the shoulders, and sometimes just along sort of the middle of the body here. So it's an unlined garment with little patches of lining in it as well, and that's just to guard the high use areas of the garment. Once you know what you have, you then have to know what you wear with the two garments. Whether you have a kimono or a yukata determines the accessories you wear with the garment and the different components that make up the full ensemble. I'm going to start at the feet and work up. A kimono is worn with tabi, the Japanese socks that have the toe split, and zori, which are like the most beautiful flip-flop you've ever seen that are worn with kimono. On a yukata, you wear geta, which are like open sandals that you don't wear tabi socks with. Because of this, it means that you wear the hems differently on the two garments. So if you're wearing a kimono, you would wear your kimono down past your ankles, or more importantly, past the top of your tabi socks. You don't want the top of your tabis to show when you're wearing your kimono. When you're wearing a yukata, you wear the yukata a little bit shorter because you're not wearing socks, tabi socks with it, so you can show your ankles. Also, this means that the garment is a little bit cooler because the air is passing across your ankles. And going back to that Japanese consideration of others, having your ankles showing makes you look cooler and makes other people feel cooler by seeing that. So your hems are worn a little bit higher when you wear a yukata. They're worn down past your ankles to cover the top of your tabi socks when you're wearing a kimono. So we've done down at the hem, we move up to ohashori. Women's kimonos and yukatas are made much longer than men's because they pull them up to then make this fold called ohashori just at the hips. The ohashori is worn the same on both garments. Of course, you pull the garment up a little bit more with the yukata, but that is usually factored in to the creation of the yukata itself. But you would just make sure that it's pulled up a little bit more. Above ohashori is worn the obi. And with men, you didn't have an ohashori, you were just putting on your obi. Men wear the same obi with kimono or yukata. It's called a kaku obi. You can find much more formal obis that you would wear with kimonos as they increase in their extravagance. For women, the obi is completely different. So on a Japanese yukata, you wear a hanhaba obi. Hanhaba means half width. and it is half the width of a regular obi. So fukura, makura, all the different types of obis you would wear with a kimono, this is half the width. The key to this is that a regular obi worn with a kimono is folded in half along its entire length and then wrapped around the body. So there's an extra layer in there that's going in every time it goes around the body that makes it thicker and more formal and more brilliant and beautiful, but it also makes it hotter, more cumbersome and more uncomfortable, especially in the heat. In a yukata, a woman wears a han haba obi, so you've got one less layer going around your body as you wrap the obi around you, and it makes you feel cooler and it makes other people feel cooler as well. Because of this, obviously, it is less thick around the body and it doesn't create that cylinder as much as a formal obi might on a kimono. The obi ita that is worn inside the folds of the obi to keep the obi flat at the front is usually made with something that has more of a mesh component to it so air can get through. Whole thing about wearing a yukata is letting air through and into your body and air out. So on a kimono, the obi, it is often more expensive than the entire kimono, and kimono are very expensive when you buy them new. So the obi is like having a Birkin bag. It is a real statement and there is a lot that goes into it. And when you're wearing a kimono, it is a completely different exercise than when you're wearing an obi with a yukata like we just saw. So when you're wearing a Japanese kimono, you've got an obi jime, you've got the obi dome, the little ornament. This is often where jewelry was worn on kimono, especially in the past where people weren't really wearing earrings, no one wore bracelets or anything. You wore an obidome. This is where you would have an emerald or diamonds. Beautiful things made out of tortoiseshell as well. So you've got your cord, you've got your jewelry, then you would have a pillow probably in the back at the masube, at the knot. So the obi makura, which literally means obi pillow, that holds up the knot, whether it's a taiko or all the other grand types. Around the pillow you have obi age, so you can hold that in place, and then underneath you've got the obi ita, which is much thicker and probably doesn't have all the mesh to help it breathe as much. Underneath that you have the date jime, which is usually again made from something quite different to what you would wear with a yukata, because it's going to be less breathable and just be a bit grander. Everything's grander in a kimono. The next big difference is the undergarments. So we'll start with men's first because they're nice and simple. If a man's wearing a yukata, you wear your underwear and maybe a protective shirt or layer underneath, but you can get away with just having your underwear on and then you put your yukata on and march out the door. When men wear a kimono, you would wear a juban underneath, which is the long robe that covers your whole body and is often patterned as well, so you can wear something with a bit more flair maybe, and that's usually tied with just a cord before you then put on your kimono. Then you put on your kimono, put on your obi, and you're out the door. It's very simple with men's dressing. You put them on, the kimono are cut to length, so you're not doing any ohashori folding or anything like that. You're putting on a juban, then a kimono, and then putting on your obi and walking out the door. The difference for women dressing in kimono and yukata is quite different, and it really again talks about the comfort. So when a woman wears a yukata, she doesn't wear as many underclothes because it's worn in summer and in hot situations. So you wear underwear and then you would wear a harajuban and maybe a suseyoke, or a light juban, something like a robe, like a kimono, but it's very light, made of light cotton, and it's just that second layer underneath. Then the yukata's put on top. In a kimono, you wear your underwear, and that can be very traditional where they use wraps and all these kind of things, or you can just wear normal underwear. Then you wear harajuban and suseyoki, which are basically a top and a skirt. So they're made of fine cotton and they cover the top, and then you wear a wrap skirt around, which is called a suseyoki, and that is the skirt. Above that is then worn the nagajuban. The nagajuban is more decorative, often in quite intricate, beautiful patterns, because technically it can show as you walk. It's a point of style to be able to show the nagajuban as you walk. It's not your underwear, but it is worn underneath the kimono. So it's just the other layer that is usually used to show through the kimono, sort of as a bit of titillation, but also as a marker of wealth. During the Edo period, where they had continuing sumptuary laws to stop people being too extravagant with the actual kimono they're wearing and what was on the kimono, the Nagajuban was a fantastic place to be able to show all this extravagance because it wasn't covered by the laws. So, for instance, they used Beni red, which was a very expensive red dye, and they would cover the Nagajuban in this color. You often see them red with a white collar. It's quite a common image to see this red garment with a bright white collar. This is the Nagajuban, and this is where you could obfuscate the sumptuary laws of the time. They're absolutely fascinating. They're a whole episode in themselves just to see how people got around it. So the Nagajuban is worn underneath the kimono, and then on the Nagajuban, on the collar of the Nagajuban, there is a sleeve that goes, so the collar is made with an open end, and in that is put something called the eri shin. Eri means collar, and shin is a stiff piece, like the obi-ita, which stiffens the obi across the torso. The eri shin is used to stiffen the collar as it passes up around the neck and make that beautiful shape around the nape of the neck. Because the Nagajuban has this eri shin in it, the Nagajuban is worn in a certain way to then dictate the path of the collar of the kimono. So this is where you create that shape around the nape of the neck. It's with this Nagajuban. And it's not with the yukata because it doesn't need to be that sweeping shape that you wear when you're wearing a formal kimono. The Nagajuban will often have a little belt loop at the back. So when you're tying your cord around, you adjust the Nagajuban with the eri shin to the point where you have that beautiful scoop around the back of the neck. Then you tie it, and that holds that in place with the belt loop and with a bunch of himo, which means tie. So koshi himo means ties for the hips, and you use them to hold that in place, which then sets the course for the kimono to travel around the back of the neck. Then on top of that sleeve, which the eri shin passes through, you would then hand sew what's called a han eri. Han means half, eri means collar. It's a half collar. It's only half the length of the entire collar of the kimono, and it's made just to show just at the neck where it peeks out from underneath the kimono. And this can be just plain white, it can be a plain color, but they can be extremely decorated. So we've discussed the accessories and we've discussed the undergarments that you wear with kimono and yukata and how different they are. Now, of course, in Japan, there's always something a little bit confusing and there's always a little bit of crossover. There are summer kimono. I talked about a hitoe at the very start of this, which is an unlined kimono. A lined kimono is called awase. Hitoe kimono are used in summer, and they're often made of fabrics that are constructed with a mesh element to the weave. So they're called ro or sha. That's the name of the fabrics, and they're absolutely beautiful, and they're woven with holes in them, in the fabric, like a mesh. These are worn with undergarments, nagajuban, harajuban, suseyoke, that again are made from much lighter fabrics. So the entire ensemble becomes lighter, but they're still worn with all those layers, opposed to the yukata, which is just worn with the one layer underneath. This is where it gets intricate. So a woman's summer kimono made from the lightest fabric would still then have underneath a nagajuban with a han eri and the eri shin and the harajuban and the suseyoke. But everything that's just mentioned is made with a different type of fabric that's got a mesh weave to it or some kind of cooling element. So it's made of linen or a real fine muslin if you're getting right down to what's next to the body. And that makes the whole garment cooler. So you're just making it feel cool, and you're making the people around you feel cool because you're wearing stuff that they know will make you feel cooler. It's all about that at the end of the day. There is a very simple way to determine between the kimono and the yukata, and when you get down into it, it can become extremely intricate. And you can really get into the different levels of formality within Japan and within traditional Japanese dressing if you want to. The main thing is cotton and silk. think of that, or if it's not cotton, it's probably a kimono. If it is cotton, it's most likely a yukata. If it's polyester, then you start to look at the other pointers that we talked about. So what you're wearing with it, how it's worn, that helps you determine between the two garments. And of course, there's the way the garments are made. If it's lined, it's a kimono. If it's unlined, it can be a kimono, but it could be a yukata. So we put all these elements together, and that is how you tell the difference between the two. So I hope I've helped you. I hope you know a bit more about the world of kimono. What is a kimono? What is a yukata? How are they different? I hope you go out and get kimono and yukata, and I hope you wear them. I hope you really delve into the world of kimono, because it is absolutely fascinating. There are lots of formalities and things that you can trip up on, but as long as you research what you're doing, you will get it right. And the main thing I've found from all my Japanese friends, Japanese people I know, and Japanese people in Japan, they love the idea of people wearing kimono because it makes them smile. So if you're doing it for that reason, then that's fantastic. I'm Kimono Alex from House of Kimono. I'm going to be talking all about kimono, about every part of kimono, and so you know more about kimono. It's such an exciting topic with so many layers, and the more you learn, the more you need to know. So it's absolutely fascinating to get into. Come along with me, subscribe, follow, like, share, tell people about it, and we're going to enter this beautiful floating world of the kimono.